So thank you, Burne, and thank you, Stanford community, and thank you, Rebecca and David, for hosting our book event in France. We didn't expect this much hospitality because we just didn't know what to expect from France when our book was first published in France. Our publisher, Grasset, told us that it will be impossible to organize any event in Paris at this time because it's a very busy time and everybody will be organizing something or not having any time to attend anything outside their plans. But miraculously, we had several friends who made our 2 weeks trip very productive at this busy time. So the first group of friends was through our American connection. Anne Altman, who is from our American school and friend, she contacted Timur and Rebecca and David. And from Rebecca and David, they offered this beautiful atelier. Timur helped organize 2 events here, one academic meeting and one graduates meeting, and I am really happy that Paul responded to Timur to invite Stanford graduates for our talk. So we also had 7 other events. One was in embassy, hosted by Embassy of Mongolia in Paris. The others were all organized by bookstores in other towns of Paris, France. So it were mostly around central area of France, but I can't say the name of the cities in pure French accent. So it's a city called Dreux and another Montluçon and Conservoir. So in these towns and cities, and there was another village which also hosted a very beautiful event for us. So each time when we talked, and people really bought our book and were very interested in our talks and asked lots of questions about our book and then our stories from Mongolia. So talk about books. This book is a product of many, many years of our work. Initially, the idea of writing this book came to my mind in 1996, so it's 21 years ago, when Mongolian government for the first time apologized for its 1930s political repression against its own citizens. In those days, right before World War II, in Mongolia, over 30,000 people were killed in 2 years. In every province of Mongolia, there was a massacre going on political basis, on political and ideological basis, when then Stalinist government of Mongolia, under Stalin's direct influence and order, killed most of the Buddhist lamas and shamans, lamas, and Chinggis Khan descendants, Buryats and Kazakhs, and also other believers in different other religions. So during this very, very dark period of Mongolia's history, there were almost every family was somehow subject to this repression, but officially apology never happened. Government never acknowledged it until democracy, until 1990. So in 1996, newly organized democratic forces won the democratic election for the first time, and one of their first laws was law on rehabilitation of politically repressed people. And then I worked for the chairman of the National Rehabilitation Committee, then vice speaker of the parliament. So I was his assistant. I was doing my work, helping my boss organize this outdoors main square political meeting in which he stood up on the podium and apologized on behalf of the government to the people of Mongolia. And I firsthand saw old people praying and crying and worshipping openly on the square when they heard that government is apologizing, the parliament is issuing law to apologize to them. But young people like me were not so interested in, didn't know why these old people were crying. So I didn't know anything about my ancestors, for example. So what happened after this meeting was, according to this new law, every direct descendant of a politically repressed victims were entitled to get 1 million tugruk from the government. 1 million tugruk of 1997 is about $20,000. So it was a big money at that time, and every family started searching for their ancestors to get that money. So I suddenly received calls from my relatives saying that, hey, we have ancestors, we have grandfather and granduncles who were killed. Find their names, find their rehabilitation paper, and we want money. So suddenly I was obliged, as living and working in Ulaanbaatar, close to the sources of National Archive and National Special Intelligence Archive. So I was digging into the archive to find the names of my relatives, to qualify my relatives to get some money. I found 6 people, and I brought all the rehabilitation papers to my grandmother in 1997, and my grandmother said, hey, this person is this kind of lama, this person is talented, this person is a singer, this person is a really, really scholarly lama. So she started telling the stories of the died lamas. So all my relatives, except me and our family, claimed for money, but I claimed I started digging into more stories of my ancestors, asking more things from my grandmother while she was alive. And thanks to that story, the book story was built around my grandmother's tale and one of the 6 lamas. So the story is based on true story, on true characters, and the main protagonist has his own real name in our book. But when I started writing, when I got an idea of writing in 1998, after compiling several archive documents and my grandmother's talk, I never had experience in writing any book before, but I started writing a big novel in my head, but my talent stopped, my ability to write stopped right after 1 month since I began, like 32 pages, that's all I could write. So in 1998 I had 32 pages, and I learned that I can't write. It should be much bigger research and much bigger stories to collect, and also you have to have a writing talent to write that. So I didn't know any of that. So I just forgot the story. My emotions faded. Everybody got their million tugriks, and my urgency faded away. So I forgot that story until I married Jeff in 2004. After one of my graduation gift was my husband from Stanford, because in 2004 I was a single mother with 2 children, with no prospect of marrying anyone, with no luck to find the good man. So in my desperation, I actually signed up a French astrologer's website, asking for a good date to find somebody. That astrologer's name is Angelica, and she had this website of foretelling who's going to marry and when is going to be a good time. But one day she wrote me an email. I paid $20 to find my husband to that website, and she predicted my forecast of 2004, and she said June 8th of 2004 is going to be one right day to find the perfect husband. If you miss that date, next such date will arrive 40 years later. But you guys all know how June 8th is so close to the graduation from Stanford. So I had my final papers due on June 9. But June 8th was nobody calling me. I didn't have any email, any calls. Even if I had an invitation to any date, I didn't have any time to date because I was doing my 4 papers at the same time to submit them all up by June 9. So I didn't have any time to do anything romantic. So then I decided that Angelica was wrong. French astrologer is not the real foreteller. So I submitted all my papers by June 9. By June 10, Stanford sent me an email that I qualified for graduation and I can invite my guests for graduation ceremony. So I invited several people who helped raise funds for me when I went to Stanford. And one of the core group of fundraisers were Jeff and Jeff's sister, and they all came. And also there were several Mongolian team and also a couple of poets from America. So I invited them all for my graduation, and Jeff came to my graduation from Cambodia. And then as soon as Jeff came to my campus, he said, Oyuna, I would like to sit on my knees in front of you. And I said, oh, there is a chair here, don't sit on your knees, there is a sofa here. And he says, no, I need to be on my knee. And he sat in front of me, opened the box and gave me a ring. I said, oh, thank you, I never received such beautiful ring on my graduation before. So I thought it was a graduation ring, but turned out, he said, I asked you a question you never answered me. And I said, what question? He said, I asked, would you marry me? I didn't even hear the question. So I said, oh, it's June 12, maybe not a good day to marry somebody. Maybe not a good day, astrologically not the perfect day to say yes. So then I said, when did you buy this ring? And he said, a couple of days ago, maybe June 8. And I said, can you give me your receipt? so he thought that I'm such a greedy Mongolian woman who wants to look at the price of the ring, and he complained about me, and then he opened his suitcase and showed me the receipt. And the receipt exactly said June 8, 2004. And I said, okay, I'll marry you. So astrology, so after Jeff had to quit his job to come to Mongolia to live with me, and suddenly very important human rights project leader suddenly become jobless and married a Mongolian and that doesn't know what to do in Mongolia. And then I asked Jeff, what would you do? What was your dream to do if you had so much time suddenly? And then Jeff said, I always dreamed to write a book if I had time. And then I said, well, then we have a book idea. I have a book idea, which I never completed. It's just 32 pages. And I told that idea to Jeff. And I think Jeff should continue from here.
All right.
Yes, he should continue from here. And that's how our collaboration started after our marriage.
So I said, wow, what a story. And we've got to do this. It was not easy. I hadn't written a novel before in my life. I'd taken some writing classes in college, but that was it. So we sat down, and Oyuna had this vast, archive of material, which we had to go through and organize and strategize as to how we wanted to put all of that together, which we did. And then I also had to go back to California and wrap up my house and get it rented out. And so every week I would get another 8 pages from Oyuna saying, here's the latest of what I've worked on. Please fix this up and send it back. And so we did that, and then I got there and we kept going, and we kept, this discussion. We'd go back and forth about, well, what if the character does this, and what if the character does that, and how does that fit with this? Which writers do. And the result finally in 2008 was The Green-Eyed Llama in Mongolian, which has since in Mongolia sold, what? 74,000 copies out of a population of 3 million. And it caught the attention of our friends at Gazette, and they said, send us a copy of the manuscript. We did, and to make a long story short, they said yes, and the book is now out.
Yes.
Yeah. Anything else?
You abbreviated too much. It's okay. Yeah. So before we go to question and answer, I would like to ask Jeff to read a little part from our book, and it will be in English because we can't read in French. So after Jeff reads, we would like to turn into conversation and just discuss about topic.
This is the first chapter of the book, and we added it as a late add-on because the story begins before all hell breaks loose, and it's a customary nomadic culture in a remote part of Mongolia, which Oyungerel is from, in the north. And so we have some chapters on what life is like, and then down comes the hammer. And so we thought we'd better put in a chapter at the beginning that kind of sets it up, that tells the reader something's coming. It's not bucolic all the way. So this is what this is. The title of the chapter is Cries of Anguished Souls, and there's two llamas walking with a stack of bones. Actual photograph. The elderly lama in his rust-colored robes watched the sky shift slowly from a sickly yellow to a deep blue as the afternoon dust storm subsided. Inside his small brick-walled room at Ganden Monastery, he nodded toward the smoke-stained tanka of the red Jamsaran deity on the wall above his modest dining table, and the shrine where a small brass statue of God-teacher Lord Buddha was placed on a painted chest beneath a chart of the zodiac. Pushing hard on his walking stick, he rose unsteadily from his stool near the blackened cast-iron stove and limped to the back wall, his hands trembling as he struggled to open the only window. The cool spring air surged into the room and out again, carrying with it the stale smell of incense. Someone rapped on his door. He turned, clutching his prayer beads, and using his walking stick as a lever, he lifted the iron latch. A tall young man in a yellow lamadel bowed low in greeting. "Burabat Lama, what brings such a high-ranking lama to my door?" "Agvan Lama," the young man said, "we need you." The old man hesitated as Burabat took his arm gently to guide him out into the light, past the lofty temple housing the great 26-meter-high statue of the Buddhist Bodhisattva Mejik Janjrik, and down the hill to a white sedan parked near the gates of the monastery. The car wound its way through the dusty streets of the crowded Ger district. A ger is what the Mongolians call a yurt. Northwest of Ulaanbaatar, towards a distant hill where heavy construction work was underway. Burabat spoke quietly as they sat in the comfortable back seat. The hilltop up ahead was being leveled for a telephone relay tower when they found him. What did they find? "You knew Janssen Hama, didn't you?" The old man had a glazed, faraway look. In his mind's eye, he saw muzzle flashes and silhouettes half illuminated by headlights. He could hear the screams and death chants of dying men. Hungry dogs howled. His skin prickled in terror at the memory. "Agwan Lama," the young man gently shook the older man's shoulder. "Did you know Janssen Hama?" Once, briefly, I saw him. It was dark." "Could you identify the clothing worn by a senior lama at that time?" "I suppose so." He looked into the eyes of the young man. "Why do you ask?" But he knew the answer. "What have you found?" At first there was a peculiar smell. Then the tractor soon turned up bones, lots of them. The old man inhaled deeply to steady himself. He could barely suppress the horrors his memory had tortured him with for over 60 years. "Any idea how many?" "So far, well over 600, buried in 3 layers. We've set aside the remains of those found with remnants of yellow garga belts and saffron or orange silk dells, as they have been wearing, which were sartorial signs of high rank. We're hoping that someone might remember, someone like you, who could help us identify Janssen Hama and the others." The old lama turned his head and gazed out at the urban slums of Ulaanbaatar's Scare district. Children hauled water jugs on small wagons and women bought bags of coal from street-side vendors. Sweet wrappers, rotting food waste, discarded batteries, and pieces of old tires lay strewn across the streets, ground deeper into the dusty earth by every passing car. Several young men in tattered clothing lingered around a shanty bar, eyeballing passers-by, their stares as unsteady as their legs. Further up the dirt road, a ramshackle bus disgorged a handful of passengers, then lurched back into the traffic, spewing black smoke from a broken exhaust pipe. Agwan Lama, I must warn you, said Purvat. Many of the bones show signs of severe torture, fractures, trauma. All were shot through the head. Many leg bones are broken too. Tears welled up in the old man's eyes. He wept noiselessly and sat back, eyes closed. The car stopped and Purvat climbed out. The driver in a yellow Dell left the car and walked to the old man's side as Purvat stared at Agwan every moment. Can you do this? The old lama nodded, extended his hand to Purvat, who led him toward the dig. A crowd of curious onlookers surrounded the excavation site. 4 policemen struggled to hold them back. An officer approached. You're not allowed to park here. We're from Gondan Monastery. We have a permit. Purvat handed the officer a piece of paper. The officer read it carefully. No photographs. I have my orders. Purvat motioned to the driver and to Agwan. They're from Gondan too. As the 3 lamas made their way towards the excavation pit, 2 middle-aged men, one with gray hair and a multi-pocketed jacket, the other a stockier figure, approached them. Honorable lamas, said the older gray-haired man, I am Akim, editor of Open Chronicles. This is my colleague, Saren Oker. Since 1990, that's the Democracy Revolution, our newspaper has exposed stories about the terrible political purges of the 1930s. This horrifying scene confirms everything we've been writing is true. The police are keeping reporters away and disposing of the remains, loading them straight onto the trucks to be cremated and burned before any pictures can be taken or forensics carried out. This must not be allowed, Purvat whispered. When we heard what was happening here, we hurried. I have a small camera in my pocket. Can we join you and inspect the area? Purvat nodded. If asked, I'll say you're with us, but make sure you give me a copy of every photograph you take. And be very careful what you publish. If you get into trouble, I'll have to deny any knowledge of your intention. Otherwise, the monastery could suffer reprisals. The men made their way towards the excavation pit. Agwan leaned heavily on his cane. Bones everywhere. Long thigh bones in a mountainous pile. Skulls stacked higgledy-piggledy, one on top of the other. Workmen pulled more of the grisly remains from the sides of the pit as they walked. An unearthly chill wrapped itself around Agwan's heart as he looked into the hollow eye sockets and nasal pits. Almost all the skulls had a round bullet hole in the forehead. Such honorable and courageous men, he murmured to himself, their bodies but earthly vessels to carry their beautiful souls. He prayed silently to himself that from such battered remains there may come signs of peaceful, expansive, powerful enlightenment. He prayed for the release of the terrible images which assaulted his consciousness. As he spied a tattered shred of clothing among the remains, he heard the skulls speaking to him. The old man inhaled deeply to steady himself as the cries of the anguished dead grew louder. As the men walked among the bone heaps, Akim surreptitiously took as many pictures as he dared. He photographed the excavation of the mass grave, splintered chins and other human remains, and fragments of saffron and gold fabric. He took shots of Purvat sighing and sitting next to a stack of skulls, then Agwan and Purvat's driver walking among the bones that were being dumped into trucks. Later, this would cost him dearly. A lengthy and expensive court battle and threats of imprisonment. He would say, though, that it had all been worth it. Mongolians and the world needed to know about the terrible genocide that had been concealed and denied for so long. That evening, After a simple meal and prayers, Ogvan readied himself for the sleep he knew would not come. By the light of a single flickering candle, he unbuttoned his cotton dell, folded it carefully, and placed it at the foot of his bed. He considered the savage scars on his legs and arms, and then looked at the Tanka of Jamsaran, the protector god, who held a flaming sword in one hand and a human heart in the other, as a symbol of his power to sacrifice human beings who do not keep their vows. It seemed to glare down at him without a hint of compassion. His voice wavered. "I was only a boy. What more could I have done?" It was a plea the god had heard many times. The old lama rolled over on his side, facing the wall. As he blew out the candle, he knew the god was still watching and judging. Chapter 1.
So that part that Jeff just read happened in 2003, but the book actually talks a story of 1937 to 1946. So this is right after prologue, the first chapter showing that denial was still happening in 2003 when big exposure happened. Actually, two big exposure happened of the mass grave. One is in Ulaanbaatar in 2003, which we have lots of photos of, but one happened in 1992 in Hoopschool province, in my province. But based on that finding, that time exposure, our book was written. So description of the 1992 discovery of mass grave doesn't reported like this, but it's reported in the story as it happened to our heroes. Yeah, so any questions? Yes. Now, can we make a light little party for everybody so that we can just have...
It's not always gloomy, by the way.
Yeah, it's not gloomy. It's a love story, actually.
It's a love story.
Yes.
Well, first of all, thank you very much for this introduction. And really, once Mr. Swan will read the book. So I apologize because I know so little of Mongolia. I was wondering if you could explain a bit more, because you were talking about, I guess, those purges that happened. There was a totalitarian regime against minorities. Culturally, how is Mongolia constituted? So I understand there's some Buddhist communities, but what are the religions, the majority? What is the ethnic fabric of the country, and how the transition of 1990 happened? What was with in a short time, the fact summary of Mongolia on these topics? Thank you. Just to enlighten me, sorry.
Okay, let me very briefly introduce my country, Mongolia, yes? So, country of Mongolia was founded by our founding father, is Genghis Khan. Genghis Khan. So, Genghis Khan founded the real country of Mongolia 810 years ago. And when he founded Mongolia, one of the founding principles of Mongolia was religious tolerance. So from 13th century, we allowed everybody who were forbidden everywhere else. So it was a religious paradise. We have religious intolerance twice, which is one was when the big Buddhist movement came to Mongolia repressing shamans, but nobody has written report of that, so we don't know exactly how many shamans and how they were repressed, but we don't know that. But written and carefully recorded repression happened during communist time in 1937 till 1947. But that period was most intolerant to religion period of our history. And after communism faded in 1990, we again give venues to all religion, and we have now more Christian churches than Buddhist temples. Even so, 90% of Mongolians claim that they are Buddhists. So we have lots of Buddhists who don't go to monasteries but still consider themselves Buddhists, and we have 5% of our population is Kazakh, which are Muslim population from beginning, and many new Christians have in Mongolia. Also, democracy of 1990 started 1 month, 1 day after Berlin Wall fell. So when Berlin Wall was falling in Europe, Mongolia, we were excited about that. We were excited about how peacefully we can transform, and the revolution was building. And 1 month, 1 day later, which is November 9 was Berlin Wall fell of 1989, and December 10 of 1989, we had our first ever peaceful democracy, 1989. First ever democratic rally for the first time. So from the winter of 1989 till the summer of 1990, about 7 months period, we had every Sunday some kind of demonstration demanding freedom of election, demanding multi-party system, demanding democracy. We never broke any window. Nobody was killed. Nobody's window was broken. There was no violence at all. It was just peaceful demonstration after peaceful demonstration, beginning from 1,000 people demonstrating, ending till 100 and 200,000 people demonstrating, all demanding for changes, all succeeded. And we had hunger strikes and demonstrations, but we never had violence. So because our democracy revolution, most of our demonstrations happened during the dead of the winter time of 1990, also it was very cold and non-violent and nobody was killed. We were not reported wildly. And Eastern Europe was the main focus of international news, and we were, our revolution was kind of not so underreported under the big noise of Eastern European change. But the change happened at the same time with them. But when Eastern European countries switched into democracy and market economy, they received economical and political support from so many democratic countries. In contrary, Mongolia was kind of a homegrown, self-sustaining, very organic democracy movement, and we were very poor. And it, throughout our struggle, we had to make lots of things on our own way, because, for example, in Eastern Europe, they were saying like all communist parties are banned, all communist-based coalitions and organizations should be banned, and new organizations, new movements should be supported, and they supported them all. While in Mongolia, we had to deal with then still strong communist party, still strong all kinds of youth organization, women's organization, trade union, all serving for the communist system of that time. We had to deal with all of them with no money, so we had to keep them all. So our democracy allowed us to keep all the old organizations, all the old parties, meanwhile grow the new parties and new movement at the same time. So we were like a little mushroom compared to big forest when we were fighting in our first ever free elections. And we, of course, were crushed in the first few elections. New democratic forces never got enough votes. But beginning from 1996, we started making coalitions, getting bigger, and then starting to win the elections. Now, Mongolia has equally strong two political parties, one grown out of combinations of newly democratic parties of 1990s, to which I belong, and the other party is former communist party, which itself reformed into a social democratic party. Without being dismantled, it itself changed its own missions and rules and everything into democratic, more democratically focused, democratically ideal-based party. So now we have parliamentary democracy, we have president, we have a cabinet nominated by the parliament, and from 2012 to 2016, I was member of parliament in that parliamentary democracy, and I was also serving as the Minister of Culture, Sports and Tourism from 2012 to 2016, and I happened to have a chance to serve in the government section too as a minister. And I worked as a president's advisor in 2009 to 2010, and further on as a non-staff advisor, and rallied for many, many elections. And most of my elections are losing elections, and several of them were very successful, but in the latest elections I've been the team member of many winning presidential candidates. So somehow we are learning to win, and we are also learning to tolerate different ideas. And one passion when we started democracy so peacefully was that one of our foundation of our values of our democratic movement that pushed us forward was freedom of speech. From beginning of this movement, it was freedom to sing whatever we want, freedom to travel, and freedom to speak our minds, and freedom to write whatever we want, the freedom to do artistic and free work. So this kind of freedom of passion for freedom of speech and freedom of expression made me a long-term human rights advocate in Mongolia, and I've been doing, whenever I lost in elections, I either studied or I did human rights, non-paid human rights work. Still I'm doing that. And through that human rights work, I met people like Jeff, and also I became passionate of writing about stories that is important to educate about human rights. So this book, our book, is actually educated young people through love story. It educates young people of the times where all the ancestors were sentenced to death without any trial, without any attorneys, and without any rights to defend themselves, etc. So they can see and compare today's privileges and rights with those of the choices that their grandparents and lack of choices their grandparents had. So this gives lots of historic background to the young people. Most of our readers are young people.
Yeah, and if I may interject for a moment, it was very clear to me very shortly after arriving that there was a kind of gap between the people who had grown up in the communist system, studied in Russia or one of the Eastern European countries, learned Russian. Under the old regime, it was forbidden to learn English unless you were a diplomat. And those, say, under about 40 or 45, who had an opportunity to learn English, to study abroad, to participate in the democratic changes. And you still have these, every year that range gets a little older. But it's the people over 40 who generally run the country and run the big companies. So there's still this tension within Mongolia. It's a generational tension, it's experience. And Oyungerel is one of those few people, the previous president, Elder George is another, who grew up in the communist system and then went on and went to the West and learned from the West. So there are some of those, but there is still a distinct difference. The old folks will watch the Russian channels on TV, they know Russian. The young kids, if they study a foreign language, it's English or it's French or it's German or it's Japanese or it's Korean, Chinese, but not Russian. Mm-hmm. So there's this real gap between the younger generation and the older generation.
But both generations really like our book.
Both generations
for
like our
different
book.
reasons,
Yeah.
very different reasons.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, I know even less about Mongolian events. What was the economic situation before communism? How many people were poor? How many people were educated? And what's it like now?
Before communism?
Yes.
Before communism, it was 30% of the people were Buddhist lamas, officially sitting in monasteries. And other 70% were all herders, nomadic herders. So the basic of backbone of Mongolian economy is herding. So why herding is Mongolian economy has very strong ecological reasons. Mongolia as a territory is a very elevated plateau. It's elevated because in past, like 300 million years ago, it was many islands like Indonesia. but we had two big plateaus, tectonic plates in front, China plate, Beijing plate it's called, and in the north, Siberia. Both are really gigantic tectonic plates, and both tectonic plates squeeze toward each other, and in the middle, hundreds of islands got squeezed, and each year it squeezed, each year it goes up, like Himalayas does. So it goes up and up and up, and now, after 300 million years, we are up there, kilometer higher than two big plateaus, Siberia and China. So each year we are going up by some millimeters, I think. And because of this elevation of 1,000 meter, at least 1,000 meter higher than our neighbors, it makes Mongolia very dry country, and rain rarely drops there. And because of the dryness and windiness of the high elevation, we have very thin soil. So because the thin soil, windiness and dryness makes farming very difficult, maybe even unsustainable, and also long winter, doesn't give us enough time to farm. So because of that, the only sustainable food and only sustainable economy was grazing animals and using meat and skin and wool and cashmere as a source of economy. So it's been like that for thousands of years because of our environmental system, because of our ecological system. It's still true. Half of Mongolian population still survives, and they quite wealthy. They live quite wealthily in that nomadic herding communities. So our book is actually talking about nomadic families of the north, which is a little different lifestyle than the Gobi, for example. In the Gobi, your nearest neighbor will be 50 kilometers away from you, but in Hufskul, nearest neighbor will be just one mountain away, which is maybe 10 kilometers, but still they will be close to each other.
Higher population
close
density.
enough to each other by horse ride.
And higher grass, more
higher grass,
rain.
more forest, etc.
Yeah.
So our high elevation really makes our economy very different from our two neighbors. One example, probably you guys all know Lake Baikal, right? Lake Baikal is the biggest freshwater lake in the world. So Lake Baikal contains 8% of world's pristine water. Fresh water.
Yeah.
There is a right next to lake, right south of Lake Baikal, there is a Lake Hupskul, which has also very pristine, pure water. So Lake Baikal and Lake Hupskul are kind of sister lakes. Both have pristine waters, both created about 5 million years ago. Both have very similar geological origin. However, Lake Hupskul is located 1,002 meters higher than Lake Baikal. And it collects the rains from all over the surrounding mountains and through over 300 little streams and rivers. And all that water goes down alongside the Mongolian territory. And all Mongolian mountain streams go into several rivers and all become one river and goes to Baikal. So Lake Baikal is actually fed by Mongolian water because Mongolia is a very high elevated country that's pouring all its water to Lake Baikal. 90% of our water goes to Lake Baikal, but some waters go to some different lakes and rivers to different areas.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes?
Yeah, I have two questions, one related to the book and one unrelated. So the one related, what was the reaction of these different generations that you're describing? What is the reaction to your book? And beyond that, what was this, I guess there is a process, internal peace process that has to go, or a redemption that has to go inside the country between the different generations, because I guess that the communists were running but through some Mongolian people. So when the Russians go, how does this, how can I say, sort of putting together again the country happens, and are there any frictions? Probably there is a period where there is frictions, and so I'd be interested in knowing this transition period, how it happens, and from these different parts of the population, what was the reaction to the
Well,
move?
Yuna can tell you more, but I do know that as soon as Mongolia declared itself a democratic country and started holding free elections, this was still communism in the Soviet Union. It was another couple of years before that changed. And all the support system from Russia stopped immediately. The Mongolians said, well, we're just going to have to tighten our belts and live like herders and get along because the floor just fell out of our economic support. And they did that. And they struggled for a long time. Go ahead and finish it.
To answer the last question first, to continue, Jeff, we had 10 years of deep economic crisis. 10 years. From 1990 till 2000, maybe 2000, we had no light in the end of the tunnel because it's been a very, very economically harsh period. Our political transition was very optimistic that we are going to democracy, we are going to freedom of press, we are going to that, but economically it's been always very hard. But somehow Mongolia went through that. Somehow we went through that with some kind of internal energy. We don't know how it happened now. Now we face like 3 years of economic crisis and everybody's like ready to collapse. But then it was like, okay, it has to happen. We are changing our orientation, so it has to happen. So everybody kind of endured it. So though, just to tell you one example how severe was this economic crisis is that in one day, before we declared a new pre-election of multi-party system, etc., Soviet Union provided 2/3 of our government budget as assistance. And our international trade was 99.9% dependent on Soviet Union. And all our businesses were all deeply connected with Soviet system of economy that we couldn't imagine ourselves without any ties with Russia and Soviet Union. But suddenly one day they decided to cut the aid, so no salary, no pension, and no gasoline for ambulances, etc. So we had no electricity, and suddenly we had everything cut off. And then, secondly, what happened was, because our trade relations stopped immediately, we had no import from anywhere else. So everything was cut off. So on our shelf, in the stores, we had only salt, and even bread wasn't enough. Yes, only salt, local brown salt that we harvested from local lakes. That's all remained on our shelves. So just to fill our stores with food and goods, government issued a passport for everybody, whoever wants to travel abroad, a passport and permission to travel abroad.
And that was new.
That was very new because we didn't have a right to travel abroad before. So as soon as government started giving passports, so many Mongolians got the passport and traveled all around the world. And the first place they went and collected goods were China, because China is closest. So we went to and emptied Chinese stores and brought things. And then we went to Germany, and all cars were drove by 11,000 kilometers on land from Germany. All the old cars were brought from East Germany. And electronics were brought from Singapore and Japan. And so suddenly the stores started filling, and we went through so many legal reforms and so many tax reforms and all kinds of reforms just to adjust ourselves every year to everything new. So I couldn't catch up just reading the new laws and new rules because everything changes all the time. So I've become a very eager reader of newspapers and magazines and journals that during the transition time everything was changing so fast. I spent 60% of my salary just to buy newspapers, just to get updated what's happening in the world, what's happening in my country. So first thing I needed to learn is English. So I was 26 when I started learning English in 3 months course. So that's how everybody learned something, everybody adjusted something. So somehow we went through this very long economic crisis. What was the first question?
Yes.
How generations cope?
Exactly.
Yes.
How they receive your book? What are the comments from them, the different generations?
Yeah. Young people love it because it's a beautiful love story. Young people all read the book because of the love story, and this book sells very well on Valentine's Day. and then my generation people were deprived of this, learning this story in our history class. So my generation learned by this book to learn the history that they were not taught in school. And lots of people have relatives, names are listed in the end of the book. Our book has the list of victims in the end, the real people, and their relatives.
1 or 2 days of victims.
Just 2 days. The people who were shot in 2 days are listed, like 700 names are listed as an example of that purge in our book. So relatives of that list, they buy those books.
Just to find the relatives.
Our book is also a best read book in Mongolian prisons. Very strangely. Anyone who goes to prison, family buys the book for the prisoner. And somebody who came out of prison told me that Green-Eyed Lama is cut into 4 sections, and first section is read by the first degree prisoner, and then they give it to somebody else next section, and 4 people would read the book at the same time, and then sale after sale, this book is the best read book. So in the libraries also it's a big book. And we went to one of my hoop school villages, and in that villages when I went there, the governor was not at work. And I asked, where's the governor? And they said, oh, governor has 3 days excuse. Oh, really? Is he dead? Is he, is he sick? He says, no. He has 3 days Green-Eyed Lama excuse. What does it mean? He says, because our office has only one Green-Eyed Lama, so everybody who's reading Green-Eyed Lama has 3-day paid excuse. Paid excuse. And that was the same case in Falt province when I went to local bank. So local Poland bank has only 10 staff, but they have 3-day paid excuse if somebody is reading Green-Eyed Lama. So in some history class it's a mandatory reading, but for literature community it was not accepted because it was written in a very different style of writing, quite American style of writing because of Jeff's influence, and then also it was written in a very different manner than the communist period literature was written.
The Lama was a hero for the first
Lama
time.
was the protagonist for the first time.
Mm-hmm.
In all socialist time literature, Lama was always the antagonist. So this was the first time when green-eyed person is beautiful and Lama is a protagonist. In all Mongolian poetry and lyrics, it's always black eyes and brown eyes that are worshipped. But when the protagonist and the handsome Lama had green-eyed, everybody was confused, puzzled. So somehow the literary community didn't accept it well, but history community, they accepted it.
It's read in history classes. Yeah. We entered a contest, a Man Asia Literary Contest, with a very early manuscript. And some of the literary society people who were all trained under the communist system complained. They said, what government agency gave them to write to send this manuscript off to somebody else in another country to look at? That's just unheard of. It has to go through the government, and they have to approve it. And if there are changes that have to be made, you have to make it before it can be sent. And they didn't do that. And it just bothered them because they were so accustomed and accommodated to this.
Yeah, because of the popularity of this book, even though it's like 74,000 copies are sold, this is also #1 ranking by the readership of every public library and #1 ranking in any other event reading, etc. so way more people read the book than it's sold. So book 2 is coming in 3 days. So we will leave tomorrow. Tomorrow morning I will fly to Mongolia, and as soon as I arrive in Mongolia, we will do the book opening of book 2. After 9 years and 10 months after the first book was released, the second book is coming. So just we didn't show the cover of the second book. We didn't reveal the name of the second book. We wrapped it in a paper, just opened enough just to show it's the second book. And then without showing the whole picture of the cover page, we posted an ad saying second book is coming. And everybody says, can we buy it before 11th? Can we buy it before 11th? I want to just look at the cover, please. So we have a very, very exciting readership waiting for us for the second book. Yeah.
This will probably be 4 books before it's over, before the democracy revolution. Yeah.
So the other day you showed me a wonderful video that you had helped, you had written and you acted in, dramatization of a discussion about grazing rights.
Yes.
And where to put the haymaking area and so on. That appeared on Mongolian television. And I'm wondering if there's a screenplay in the works for the Green Outlaw.
I have another screenwriting project coming. I will write a Mongolian television soap opera on democracy pioneers. So I already started discussing on that. But novel.
And I've got one on Roy Chapman Andrews in the 1920s, who found the dinosaurs down in the Gobi and that adventure. So we're working on screenplays too. Yeah, go ahead.
I'm a big dinosaur enthusiast too.
I don't know if you Google.
Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah. If you Google Oyungerel and hit
Yes.
images, she'll be standing with some dinosaurs actually. As minister, she brought a lot of stolen dinosaurs back to Mongolia.
Yeah. I'm on my pictures. The most famous pictures of me that's popping up first is usually I'm standing there to repatriate, to bring a big dinosaur from US to Mongolia, because Mongolia is a big dinosaur country. There are 4 big dinosaur countries, maybe 5 big dinosaur countries in the world, which is Mongolia, China, Canada, US, and Argentina. And these countries deliver the best dinosaurs to the paleontology. And usually Mongolia's Gobi dinosaurs are the best of the best, because in wetter countries, the finer details of bones doesn't survive, because it's just
erodes.
Because they erode, because the biological process in wet and warmer countries eat up all the fossils, while drier and sandier place, they preserve every detail of the dinosaur by fossilizing every element. So if dinosaurs are found in Mongolia, it's found with the finest details. That's why Mongolian dinosaurs are very expensive on black market. So we cannot stop it without stopping the market dealers. So when I was Minister of Culture, I was part of Mongolia's quest to bring big Tarbosaur Batar back to Mongolia.
A Tyrannosaurus.
Tyrannosaurus Batar, yeah.
And did.
Yeah, I did.
And the guy went to jail.
Yes,
Right.
And then actually after that successful lawsuit of first big dinosaur back to Mongolia, while I was minister, I was also able to negotiate the return of 40 stolen dinosaurs, including 2 from France. Yes. Yeah.
Wow.
And
But
one actually came while I was minister, the other came after I gave my work.
Were they in private hands or public?
They've been in private hands.
organizations?
They've been in private hands through dealers. Yeah.
Yeah, what alerted us was the notification of an auction, when this dinosaur was being auctioned in New York.
Yeah.
And we knew it came only from Mongolia, so that started the ball rolling.
Yeah, if you do Oyungerel and then dinosaur and then hit, then you will have lots of videos and photos and stories about it. Yeah.
Anyway, so that's another thing.
That's my another passion.
Yeah.
Human rights dinosaur book.
Any other-
Yes.
And now you're working. You have a project on sanitation.
Oh, yes. Timur is becoming my
Thank you.
publicist.
the straight man problem.
Please talk about toilets now. Yeah, there is a strange, not strange actually, it's a very important project going on, because when Jeff came to Mongolia with his human rights expertise and with his experience and no job in Mongolia, one thing was doing book, but book is very boring job. If he wants to be among the community, he doesn't have access to that just by writing book. So I asked Jeff to join me in Mongolia's NGO, founding of a Mongolian NGO called Local Solutions Foundation, which whose vision and aim is to train and educate future local leaders who can tackle the real local problems with knowledge of public participation and the consideration of everybody's issues and rights, and with the environmental and scientific knowledge. So our modest foundation is very small, very poor, very modest foundation, but it was consistently training students to do summer local projects on sanitation, on environment, and on local involvement and creating local little businesses, etc., for 11 years. 10 years. 10 years. But on our 10th year anniversary, we wanted to do something big, so we applied for project funding from a very respectful American foundation, and then they gave us funding to do what we want to do on our 10 years anniversary, which is to write I will write a book on toilet, how to change our dirty pit toilets into something
Polluting the groundwater and so on. Yeah.
soil polluting, dirty and inhumane toilets, how to change it into a more sophisticated but also environmentally clean toilets. So we are doing this. I wrote this book on Let's Change Our Toilet, and we are going to do now year-round training in all provinces on technologies and on public inclusion of toilet changing decision making. Everybody wanted to change their toilet, but nobody can do anything because they don't talk between each other and they don't know what technology they should choose to improve the community lifestyle and what kind of services will be available, etc. So this book actually offers 15 models of toilets and 10 models of community sewage systems and sewage businesses, and 6 models of decision making, how government-led decision making can be done, how local council-led decision making can be done, and how citizen-driven decision can be made, and how communities, small by small, can be organized and make decisions, etc. So we are offering all these decision-making models, and this is all based on real examples and real things. We're all drawn. So that book is now creating lots of excitement in Mongolia, and we opened this book on World Toilet Day, November 19. And while we are in France, we received news that our toilet book is ranking #1 in bestsellers list since then. So people are really buying it. So we are selling 20,000 copies of toilet book and collecting the income, and using this income we are going to do a nationwide public education tour. So this book will finance our tour in the coming months. So as soon as I come home, open book 2, and then immediately after 2 days since the book opening, I will start doing my intensive toilet trainings.
Now I detour for a little while. I visit my kids in New York, and then I come back. Any questions? Yeah.
Yes. So I mean, I'm not an understand more what you have done. You're both leaders who have done very different things. And I was wondering if you'd actually share with us, I think, talk about leadership. You have both lived in countries that were not your own. You have worked in very difficult conditions. What are some of the leadership qualities, leadership traits that you have learned, that you have developed by doing all the different things you have done? And also specifically as a woman, how challenging lives or more across countries? I would love to hear both your perspectives.
How challenging marriage?
No, just being a woman leader.
Oh,
Being
okay.
in a leadership position in government or now also as an entrepreneur, as a writer, being a woman, is it an advantage, is it a disadvantage? I would love to hear leadership in general and then as a woman leader.
Why don't you start?
Well, I found everything starts locally. With local councils, with local leaders, and discussing with them, learning from them, hearing what their concerns are, and the community in which you're working. Some communities are very stratified, either through caste or through wealth or lack of it, or race or religion. There's various ways in which there are fissures within every society. And sometimes people in certain communities are badly treated by people in another community. So my quest was to try to find ways to empower those people who were at the bottom of the system in terms of the way they were treated, who were ethnic minorities or women and children or poor, and to help them to organize and to articulate their own concerns and to form, an effective voice for change. That's easier in some countries than it is in others, certainly. But I think everywhere I worked, it was helpful. Sometimes more so, sometimes less so. It depended on what the authorities had in mind and how threatened they felt. And so you have to tread very carefully on this, to not frighten those in power and to convince them, as well as the community, that there are ways forward that don't challenge too much any of the existing positions. So it's an evolutionary process. You don't come in and start championing and suing and battling and it blows up in your face if you do. You have to be careful. So it's partly community organizing too.
Yeah, my story is a little different.
Yeah.
Yeah, Mongolia is a quite egalitarian society.
And homogeneous pretty much.
Very homogeneous and
Yeah.
very egalitarian, and women and men are treated very, very equally. And we are freely given voices to anything we want to say until certain glass ceiling. So until I reach that glass ceiling high level, I never experienced that I have a problem as a woman. I was always given a chance to talk, given a chance to lead, and given a chance to organize things. So everybody was supportive until I wanted to run for parliament. When I wanted to run for parliament in 1996, first time, my whole family was divided into two. One saying, okay, do it, you can do it, and the other saying, never, never, never. So I had to have a vote among my direct siblings and my father. So I needed 6 people's support, just my close family support, just to go forward to be comfortable of running for parliament. And 3 of them, my biggest sister, my immediate brother, younger brother, and another sister, they all said no. You shouldn't ever run. You are good assistant to Elbert Dorch, you are good assistant to Prime Minister, but you are not. You shouldn't be in front of people talking about big things, and you shouldn't be parliament members. And then other 2 were passionately supportive of me. You should run, you're the good candidate. And then my father was a decisive voice. If father says no, I could say I would have a difficult time to run, but if my father says yes, I could boldly run. So I asked my father, I couldn't ask my father to support me immediately. I just asked my father, what if I do this? and would you support? And the father says, I'll think about it, I'll think about it. And then I called my sister, who is passionately supporting me, and I said, could you please tell father to vote for me? So my father was convinced by other sisters and brothers to say comfortably yes to me, but still it was like 50-50 support from immediate family. And then my party colleagues were always applauding me until I wanted to run. As soon as I wanted to run, they said, oh, you're a single mother. You don't have right marriages. And after I finally married, they said, oh, you've married a foreigner. So each time I was either widowed from my first husband, or I was divorced woman, or I married the wrong nationality. So in each of my marriages, I went through all the problems that any woman can go through. And then each time my party guys will say, Oyungerel, you're kind of educated person, but your private life is not perfect for a politician. So I finally had to rise up at that level that I can, they have to run me. So that position was, I had to be a president of Democratic Party's women's organization. Nobody supported me from the big politicians, but I put my candidacy there and I participated in 450 people's gathering who will select the president of the Democratic Party's women's organization. So I was the new candidate out of blue, uncalculated candidate, while the whole delegation were divided equally into for two other candidates. But I was the third candidate. But I spoke for those 450 women, just looking at their eyes and said that we've been told by men who can run, who cannot run, whose life is perfect, whose life is not perfect, who is pretty, who is not pretty, who is wearing what, etc. So let's stop this listening to the men's complaints about us. Let's just vote for us. Every woman has the right to have an unperfect life, imperfect life, or unpretty face, or whatever we want, whatever we are given by fate. So just vote for me. So I gave a very, very strong speech. Nobody expected that kind of speech, and I got overwhelming support out of blue. And men were asking, they had women supporters inside the hall, and they put the phone on, with microphone on. In other rooms, our party's big male bosses were listening to my talk through the telephone. And later they told me that, oh my God, that was unexpected speech that you gave me. And we were calculating who's going to be boss and who's going to be woman leader. But so I was elected as president of a women's organization that way. And as soon as I became #1 woman in my own party, I was obliged to run, I was obliged to be minister, I was obliged to lead party's certain section for the election. And that year, of course, I won the election with overwhelming majority in my constituency, with the biggest gap of victory in my party. And then I immediately got accepted into ministry position, despite I really didn't like to be minister that time, but they put me into that position because of my position. So I had to really do my own work inside women's community in order to get accepted. But it was quite a journey for me. But after that position, after women accepted me, men had to accept me later. So,
I would be interested in knowing from your minister position, what are today's challenges for Mongolia, because now you're a free economy. You have a lot of pressures from Russia, from China. You have mineral resources, so probably there's also a shift from the rural areas or the nomads into cities. So you probably have environmental challenges. You have economic support. So from your minister position, what are these main challenges today facing Mongolia in the future?
I was a Minister of Culture, Sports and Tourism. If I were a Minister of Environment, I would be doing a lot more, because Even before democracy, I became environmental activist by just being in my own province. Because my province, Hupskul province, is the most beautiful area of Mongolia, but very rich with phosphate. So phosphate mining was one of the goals of then communist government, but local people like us were opposing to phosphate mining. Even before democracy, in very few numbers, we still demonstrated holding no phosphate mining in Hupskul. We are still doing that after 30 years.
Poison the lake.
Yeah, we are still doing that. Even today morning we were tweeting against this because somebody also wants to have some mining there. So fight against big mining is everywhere in Mongolia, everywhere. It's been long fight. It will be long fight in future too. I don't think it's a pressure from Russia or China. It's actually pressure against money and pasture and environment. That can be anyone. Those who are holding licenses who want to dig can be anyone. Can be Mongolian. Can be foreign companies and joint companies, etc. But still, we have to fight a lot. As a member of parliament, I initiated one parliament resolution to protect about 1 million hectare area just to give last water resources in one Gobi mountain area, because that is a very coal-rich area, and that whole zone, like a territory of Czech Republic, is full of coal. And that area has been digging by so many companies that the last resource of water is concentrated only in one corner named Tossenbom. So all wildlife moved there, all gazelles are there, all wolves are there, and all snow leopards are there, and all herders are there. In the last this resort, there is still big mining licenses are given away. So I got that area protected by government, by state, and got parliamentary support, and finally we thought we protected it. But when we lost the election in 2016, the new government made the border. While making the border, they actually gave away all the water sources to the mining licensed area. And we are still fighting for that. Maybe one of my fights for next year will be I have to represent that area in court as a witness, so that citizens and herders from that area can win the case, because they still trying to keep the last water resources from mining. So mining, Mongolia's mining is interesting story, because as I told you, because of our geological history is fragments of many lands elevated by the tectonic push. Because it's elevated, because it has many magmas, fractions to the magma sources, we have lots of gold, copper, and silver, and oil and coal, all found alongside those fractures of the tectonic fractures. And those fractures also coincide with the water sources. So where there is river, there is a gold. Where there is river, where there is a water fraction, there is also coal fraction. So we have to fight for every water. And every mining and water resources are always a fight. And nomadic herders are very few and very scattered. They can't get united to fight for the lands, and suddenly they lose their pasture and land. That's why we are trying to educate herders as much as possible, and local leaders as much as possible about the land and about the environment and about the future business possibilities, so that they can see future possibilities not only in mining but also in something else.
Mining is so tempting because there's a lot of money in it, and would be economically beneficial in terms of taxation for the country. On the other hand, there's also a lot of corruption that goes along with it. A lot of that money goes to places like Panama and so on. illegally, and that's been recently brought out. So there is a struggle between the haves and the have-nots in Mongolia, just as there is in so many countries. And the haves always want more. And so that's a battle that continues.
Yes. It's a big battle. It's going to be long in generations, I think.
But that country down there that Oyuna has been protecting, and they did a big television expose on it, you were part of that, is absolutely beautiful. And as she says, the last bastion of some very rare animals. Yeah.
May I suggest, because the time is very, this is passionate and very interesting, the time is running, and I think we have prepared
We can have informal discussions with them.
exactly, and maybe there is something to drink that we
Yes,
can
we
offer.
got some champagne.
And we can continue the discussion.
And there are soft drinks.